All right, well, the topic today is New York infrastructure, and we're lucky enough to have panelists that represent a wide array of industries associated with that, including front haul and back haul fiber, data centers, and in-building and outdoor wireless deployments. While I was doing my research for this, I came across a 2018 study by McKinsey that ranked the top global cities for smart city deployment, specifically infrastructure. And I don't know, does anybody care to guess where New York landed on that list? Show of hands, show of fingers. Toes? Number 2. New York came in number 2 and behind Singapore and ahead of Seoul. So we're going to get to number 1, right, guys? Right, gentlemen? That's the plan. The other finding there was the deployment of infrastructure was only about 2/3 of the way through. So clearly there's a lot of work to go, and I'm sure that our panelists here would agree with that. The good news is they're all at the forefront, the leading edge of deployment of infrastructure, and we have a great opportunity here to learn about what's going on associated with keeping New York at the forefront of smart city evolution and some of the trends that we'll face over the next 5 years and beyond. So I'll ask each of the panels to introduce themselves very briefly, and then we'll go ahead and just get into some Q&A.
I'll go ahead. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a lot for having me today. My name is Tom Brown. I am the President and CEO of DataGryd. We are a single asset data center located in the iconic 60 Hudson Street. We occupy 2 floors that equals 120,000 square feet, and to support that, another 50,000 square feet. What's unique about DataGryd today, we just recently launched a 1 megawatt data hall. Our model has changed. 3 years ago, we deployed, here comes Ray. 3 years ago, we deployed a entire floor to an anchor tenant, and that is DRT Telex. And recently, we saw some trends where there is a need for smaller increments of space. One unique thing about DataGryd is that we have a power supply directly fed from the utility. A total power source of 15 megawatts and a total of 12 diversely coming from the utility, which is rather unique. In addition to that, we are changing the landscape as far as interconnectivity is concerned. Every conference that we go to, there's always that ever ongoing challenge of interconnectivity. And today, there is no sanctioned meet-me room within 60 Hudson Street. And one of the things that we're able to do is to mitigate those meet-me areas to reduce that burdensome cost. We have the ability to provide direct connect to each of the floors within 60 Hudson Street to provide a direct connect via a 4-inch conduit. So with the ability to provide dense power applications to a footprint, as well as mitigating that cross-connect, it's a compelling offer that we have here at 60 Hudson Street.
Great,
George.
thanks, Greg.
Thank you for
allowing us just briefly introduce yourself,
Sure.
and then we'll get to the questions.
Absolutely. GIX Fiber may or may not know about GIX Fiber. We are a startup company. We are deploying fiber through the PATH tunnel between New York and New Jersey. It's the most southern route that will be available. It has low density, as well as obviously 1,296 pair of new fiber, which makes it very unique. We are, I consider to be a carrier of carriers. We are here to not compete with the carriers, but to add value to both the folks on my left and certainly the data center as well. And we expect to have service in Q1 of 2020. We have a 20-year contract with the port, which gives us longevity and will allow us to continue to operate and provide dark fiber, which will be unique between New York and New Jersey, since there's not a lot available, and the fiber that's there today is aging. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Greg Spraetz. I'm with ExteNet Systems, and I run the real estate group for the company, the business unit. We've got basically three legs to the stool of our business. We've got the enterprise side of the business, where we announced last year about this time the acquisition of Hudson Fiber Networks to help us monetize a lot of the fiber assets we have around the country. And then we've got the outdoor business unit, which primarily focuses on the 4 mobile operators for small cell deployments and macro deployments. We've got about 400 or 500 miles of route miles in the Manhattan and New Jersey area, supporting that, and then also supporting a lot of our enterprise clients and carrier clients. And then we've got the real estate side, which is more on the outside, moving to the inside, where we've got 40-something neutral host DAS systems, wireless systems in various buildings and venues such as Madison Square Gardens, Barclays, ESRT portfolio, Empire State Building, where we provide all the infrastructure there for the wireless coverage solutions. We also put fiber in there for enterprise, and then also other carriers who want to get access into those buildings. We'll pull fiber in there for those guys as well, connect all the data centers. But we also, another big part of our business on the inside, as Salim was talking about earlier today, for those that heard about it, was the inside of the building. We're really focusing on that from an infrastructure perspective. So I guess we'll probably get into a bit more of that, but it's enabling just about anything that needs to go on inside the building there. And we look to invest in that and manage that and operate that on behalf of real estate portfolio companies.
Thank you, Greg. And Ray, I'm going to combine your intro with our first question for tonight. You're literally part of the fabric of New York City. So, from our discussion, you're onto a lot of very exciting activities right now, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about the company and what you're doing to get the fiber out to all the points that are going to have to land to consume all the 5G data that's going to be coming down the way.
Great, thanks, Rob, and I want to apologize for my not so fashionably late entry. So anyway,
It's New York; it's allowed.
So I'm co-founder and CEO of ZenFi Networks. We're a local company, and we're categorized as communications infrastructure. We provide fiber optic network, wireless siting, and network edge colo solutions to enable, primarily to enable mobile operators to build their value-added networks on top. So companies like Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T would leverage our assets to build their infrastructure throughout the city. We started this business about a little over 5 years ago with the sole purpose of building a different kind of fiber infrastructure. When you look at the, I get asked the question all the time, isn't there enough fiber in Metro New York? Isn't there enough fiber in New York City? Companies have been building networks here now for 30 years. And my answer to that is yes, there's a lot of fiber, but it was built to serve a different, solve a different problem. The legacy fiber networks were built to solve the enterprise networking problem, which was a sparse network environment where the sites that had to be connected were fairly far apart, and I categorize those as backhaul networks. The missing piece of the puzzle as the mobile networks evolve is a piece of the network called front haul. And when you look at the network architectures that are evolving today to support mobile, the mobile networks have to densify. The coverage networks have been built. The old DRAN, distributed RAN networks with macro sites and towers throughout the region have been built, and you're not going to see too many of those being built in the future in dense urban environments. What you are going to see is the mobile densification that not just solves for the coverage problem, but it solves for the capacity problem. And the way to solve for capacity is to put low power cell sites any and everywhere, from the sub-basement to the rooftop of buildings, every floor of every office building, the subway tunnels, and every intersection and every street corner in the region will have some sort of cell site. And those cell sites have the effect of taking the spectrum and covering a smaller radius, and effectively every time you add one, or every time you double the number of sites, you're doubling the number of capacity. And as we move to a 5G environment, it's all about capacity and latency. So the networks have to be built with antennas everywhere. So when we started this business, we had a vision of the new type of network that had to be built that complements the existing network, and that's this front haul piece. And what's different about front haul than back haul? Imagine going up Fifth Avenue and having to put an antenna at every site. The old networks were built, I mean, at every intersection. The old networks were built with splice points, every 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 feet apart. And they would build laterals, and you'd build a lateral off to a building, and then maybe a mile down up Fifth Avenue, you do another lateral to the building. You didn't have that much density. The problem we have to solve for is now there's a lateral every 250 feet in Manhattan up the avenues. Well, how do you do that? The old backhaul cables, imagine if you're build networks, you'll get what I mean, but imagine ring cutting an 864 or 1728 fiber cable every single 250 feet. There's a couple problems with that. One is the amount of congestion in the manholes doesn't allow you to leave those splice cases, first and foremost. And secondly, the cost. It's dramatically more expensive to ring cut those big cables. It could take 1 or 2 days for a splice team to prepare a splice case at each one of those intersections. And we're talking in $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 to prepare those splice cases for each one. So imagine if every single small cell had that additional cost associated with it. Then the other problem is when you have a splice case 3,000 feet away and you have to go 250 feet, 500 feet, 750 feet, 1,000 feet, you'd have 4 parallel cables that you'd have to rod and rope and prepare and install those. So the old backhaul networks just weren't built to support this, the legacy fiber providers. So the new network, the front haul network, has to be built where you could actually break into that cable at each one of the, frankly, at every single manhole you traverse. So when we started the company, we designed an architecture that had the legacy backhaul component, of course, and then it was further developed to have this access cable, this access front haul network that runs along, up these avenues, and we can break into that cable over 250 feet. That's a real special sauce, and I think anybody that builds small cell networks and has to do this ultra densification is learning that the old networks don't work, and we all have to build this whole new parallel front haul infrastructure. And that's one of the activities that's happening in every dense urban environment.
Great, thank you. And what we're talking about here, we're anticipating significant growth in traffic ultimately, and George, when I talk to you, GIX is kind of in a position to help diversify some of the routing of that traffic, and would be very interested to know your thoughts on how the traffic kind of flows through the city and outside the city into the various endpoints.
Okay. So to add to Ray's point, latency, capacity, and then the third point is load balancing. It's extremely important as you backhaul. The front haul is great because those are basically the eyeballs to the content. So our view is that there's going to be an extreme amount of new content and required content to be transferred between New York and New Jersey, and having an additional diverse path between New York and New Jersey becomes so important. And in fact, you can easily make the point that cost of ownership of networks decrease. And the reason for that is, a simple example is if you had 200 gig lit services, put it this way, if you had 200 gig lit services running at, say, 55, 60% utilization, generally speaking, networks are designed to absorb one failure. Well, if you take one failure, you're going to either dump traffic on the ground or cause poor performance. So you're going to need a third. You're going to need a third 100 gig. So in that scenario, if you've got 3 diverse paths, that's great. If you don't, then you're basically adding 2 circuits on each of your 2 paths, and that increases your cost of ownership. So diversity is so important, and certainly the low latency also provides value. The other area is, planning 101 of networks for capacity, put the circuits where the traffic wants to go. So one of the other areas that GIX is focusing on is putting capacity from 60 Hudson, gentleman next to me, and into the World Trade Center, and then out on Grove Street in the New Jersey side, and then various places, right? Whether it be 165, whether it be New York 4, whether it be even driving down, when I say driving, running fiber down to Ashburn. Certainly there's a bunch of networks, Fiber Lights here today and others that would certainly like to have that opportunity of additional capacity from New York City. So we find it very important not only to look at the diversity as far as the value there, but also the latency and the ability to carry that traffic. The other thing I will mention too, what makes this path very unique, and I didn't say it in the beginning, was that after Sandy, the Port Authority actually did a really good job here. They actually put floodgates on the ingress and egress side of the tunnels, so that in the event that we have some sort of flooding, as we had before, certainly the percentage of availability increases dramatically, right? So our fiber termination is way above sea level. The fiber itself going through the path will not be underwater, and therefore our goal is not only to provide diversity and latency, but is to provide high availability. And we find that a lot of the financial industries are really excited about this, right? Because certainly, it doesn't take a lot to figure out that their business is certainly riding on connectivity. So we're excited about this, and I think that having this path, this is the right time to have it, because the gentleman said this morning, 65%, I guess, of all data is wireless, right? So those are eyeballs, right? What is there, 8 million people plus in New York City, and then on any day, what is there, another 1 million or 2 that comes in, transit workers? I mean, there's a lot of eyeballs out there. Content is so important to get to these folks. Content's going to be not only in New York, but also in Ashburn and New Jersey and other places, and that's our value.
Great, thank you, George. I'm glad you brought up that interesting fact about the floodgates. That was something I didn't anticipate when we talked about it earlier. Tom, what role will DataGryd play with this increasing volume of consumer and commercial traffic? And what trends do you see in the evolution of your data center as the traffic continues to increase?
I think DataGryd is well positioned because of the aggregation point of 60 Hudson Street, right? It already exists. I had a prior conversation with Ray, and not only do you need 60 Hudson Street, you need other aggregation points throughout the city. And you're going to see that down the road forthcoming of the providers in various areas, whether they're in COs or other given areas, but you do need that aggregation point. Some of the trends that I see is, and we just rolled out a 1 megawatt data hall where we'll furnish smaller parcels of space. But the density level of power is much greater. What was once 2 or 3 kilowatts per footprint is now 5 to 8. And we'd be able to accommodate that based on the infrastructure that we designed. So I certainly see smaller footprints and by default becoming an edge data center. The ability to interconnect and have that aggregation is something that kind of falls right into our lap.
Okay. You also mentioned this interesting idea of edge pops. Did you want to speak to that a little bit?
So how do we define edge, right? Edge is, we define it as an aggregation point, right? It's such a broad term today. So what is 60 Hudson Street? There's well over 300 service providers that reside within the building. And with the smaller footprints, by default, we become an edge data center.
Okay, thank you. And Greg, kind of tying this all together, a significant amount of this traffic is both being initiated and completed in building. So what is ExteNet helping with your customers to maintain that seamless connectivity between inside and outside of the buildings?
Yeah, so I think the way we kind of look at it is from the outside in and the inside out because of our asset base and the services. So we partner with pretty much everybody up here in one form or fashion, whether we can't access something and we need to rely on another partner's fiber. None of us can do it all, which is the beautiful thing about this industry as well, is you co-opetition. So, whether it's on the outside looking at the metro footprint and accessing the data centers and the content, to then entering the buildings with infrastructure to deliver the various services that the tenants want and that the building owners want, that is not inside the building, that's cloud-based, data center-based. So as we look at infrastructure, we look at it, like I said, from the outside in, what we bring into the building: carriers, service providers, wireless providers, and then from the inside out, it's connectivity. What do the tenants need? What does the building owner need? Is it infrastructure? Is it private infrastructure that a portfolio owner wants for BMS systems, surveillance, connecting all their buildings together? Is it IoT services? Is it compute, artificial intelligence? There's so many platforms that we're seeing being deployed and being readied for, CBRS, 5G, and what are the use cases? So there's a lot of hype about that, but we're also seeing some of the platforms and working with those companies now because they require connectivity to the buildings and then back to a cloud-based application of what they're providing to the building owner or to a tenant in that building. So it's a really exciting time for us because we focus on, enabling the building to be able to support all those services through the infrastructure that we'll install in the building. We're not a riser company, a riser management company. We don't actually do the cable pulling. We work with the companies that do that for the building owner. We just work with the building owners to manage it, maintain it, monetize it, and make sure that their building is intelligence ready. A lot of the DAS systems that we have in buildings today, like in New York City, that we've got 35 plus systems that are neutral host systems that are been around for years. The technologies that are coming out now aren't supported through those DAS systems, and so 5G isn't supported. So you need infrastructure to support that, and the carriers are wanting to deploy their own technologies in the building. So you need to continue to have neutral infrastructure in those buildings and make sure that they're ready for them. They may want to put a small cell in a couple floors. They may want to put a spider cloud. They may have a corporate client. Some of the carriers may not have any interest in the building because they don't have, a use for that. They don't need any offload. And so we work with we take all those aspects into consideration. And then from a micro data center for managing the meet me room for them, we'll look at ways to monetize that. Carriers of all kinds need places to just drop a rack or two. And if we've got the fiber coming in and out of the building, we'll provide that as well. So that's kind of the view from our side.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Question for you, Ray. I cited a study up front here that indicated, the deployment for infrastructure for some of the leading edge cities globally to get to the state of, quote unquote, smart cities is about 2/3 of the way done. Would you agree with that? And where are you in the rollout process, and how much longer do you anticipate getting a certain degree of saturation, or what are your saturation targets?
Sure. So if we if we look at New York City specifically, I consider the city well behind in the 5G race at this point. We've had a lot of issues with finding sites to put antennas on, and where we are with the city and the consents to actually build the networks that have to get built. It's the real early innings of 5G, right? So we have an opportunity to certainly catch up. But the first thing that has to get done is the underlying space, power, and connectivity infrastructure. So for outdoor 5G, obviously macro sites can be retrofitted for coverage, but then we have to focus on the capacity problem, and that's the densification. And that's, in this case, light pole, utility pole, and street furniture mounted antennas. And when I say they need to be everywhere, they really need to be everywhere. So the city's working through new alternative siting options for all of us. There's 4 franchisees in the city that are active. Us, ExteNet, Crown Castle, and Mobility have been building nodes. And that hard infrastructure, the getting space on a light pole, for instance, getting power to the antenna, we have to bring our own power there, and getting fiber there. That infrastructure that's supporting 4G and LTE nodes today can eventually be retrofitted. But we have another problem. If you walk right outside the front door on 42nd Street, you'll see 3 boxes mounted on antennas with an Omni antenna on top. Those boxes are housing either DAS gear or small cells or radio heads for the carriers. The problem there is they all have these Omni antennas that are anywhere from 2 feet to 5 feet tall, and we need a different form factor for the antennas. So New York specifically is well behind, and we need to catch up, and we need a lot of support from the municipality and the agencies, as well as investment from the carriers to really get us up to speed.
Okay, so still quite a ways to go. Tom, what about data center floor space? Do you anticipate, the requirement for growth and expansion in New York City to meet the specific, especially the low latency needs of some of the customers like financial businesses that you work on?
I think it's going to run parallel with what Ray just described. Once the 5G is rolled out and starts maturing, there obviously will be a need for space and power. But again, as I said earlier, we're well positioned to accommodate that because we do have ample amount of space as well as power.
Okay. And George, I assume you're going to be future-proofed for the long term after this deployment. Tell us a little bit about what's next after this gets done, and additional pathways that may need to be built to continue to accommodate the traffic outside of the island.
Yeah, thank you. So our primary service will be, as I said earlier, we've got 1296 through the path, and we certainly, our sweet spot is IRU or lease fiber on that. We'll also light up 100 gig, 200 gig, 400, 600 gigs from different POPs within New York to New Jersey. And the thought process is we will build a network where services provide us a return on investment. It's really that simple, right? If our sales group go out and says, listen, we have an opportunity to deliver 200 pairs of fiber, we'll look at what the cost is to build to that facility. So we have an open greenfield approach. We're in the midst of completing our funding. We certainly believe we will have not only the opportunity to lease and use IRUs on these fibers and then expand from there. And then, to be honest with you, the Port Authority, as you may or may not know, is certainly a challenge, to get completed, right? And that's not a degradation on the port. It's just the way they do business. So we are also going to look at, after we have this completed in the process, we're going to look at other opportunities like this because, we understand how they operate, and whether it be New York or somewhere else, we're going to look for those niche areas to build out.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And we're running out of time, but Greg, one last opportunity. How far are we running ahead or behind the needs of the end users here in regard to, I just made that one up, so.
I don't know.
So to help you tie everything together here.
I guess from a consumer perspective, I'd say we're running way behind. If you hear them,
right.
Coverage solutions, not enough bandwidth, whatever it is, latency. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now. And then also, how do we do it? 5G is just now picking up. It's going to take a couple of years to put the infrastructure out there. I think we're halfway through. I think we talked about this on another panel. It's like we're halfway through 4G. They're like an 8-year life cycle. And so we're about halfway through 4G, and then 5G is going to pick up devices, applications to drive all this up, how to monetize it. The economics of it are also kind of a head scratcher too. So, but there's a lot of work to be done, but it's exciting, because there's a lot to be done as well, and demand. Well,
it's good news that we're behind and there's demand, and I guess we just have to figure out who's going to pay for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.